Hi there. Welcome back to Dive In. We're your host. I'm Christian.
Jessica,
And today's topics, we're going to dive right in. How are you
right?
doing, Jess?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Good.
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 It's 100 degrees here today, so that's been fun.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I got a question for you while we're talking about Iowa. What's corn sweat?
I saw that.
I've never,
Not
as much.
unlike not unlike cow farts, I think, That's real. That's real
So,
for the
how am I
climate.
just now learning about corn sweat? Of
I'm
all
just
the.
learning about it too. I
Really?
mean, all I knew was knee high by the 4th of July, but here we are. I'm gonna have to read that
Apparently,
article.
apparently, corn sweat is adding to the humidity out there.
Yeah, it's about 75% humidity right now. And then I had a meeting earlier. It was like Florida. We were sitting outside. It was bright and sunny. Started raining. It's
Right?
crazy. So anyway, welcome to late August in Iowa. And I'm sure other places are experiencing the fun humidity as well.
Right. We got a break in the heat around here, the Washington D.C. area last week, but now I guess we're going to get that heat that you guys are having
Oh
now.
yeah, it's coming
So that
at
comes
you.
tomorrow. Uh huh.
Yeah, it makes it a hot walk back from school.
Yes.
But so today, I think we've had this discussion a number of times, but I'm excited to do a deep dive into how Christian became an operative. And I say operative, I hope you want to be called an operative. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe
That's what I
it's,
am.
yeah, that's what you are. There's other words to describe what we do, but I like operative for you. But we were talking about this a little earlier, and I'm not, trying to change the format because we just have our third podcast. But
That's right.
my daughter Genevieve, I call her Jay. She's been doing swimming for a couple of years, and she learned the deep dive and the shallow dive. She's pretty good at both. So I thought maybe we could do a couple shallow dives
Yep.
before we got down to the deep dive of your life. About some of the things that we might have missed or that are happening right now. And again,
Yes.
today is Tuesday, the 26th. Is that
7.
right? 7th. Okay, see. I This morning we walked to school. I said it's Wednesday, it's early out day, and then the people we were walking with said it's Tuesday. So
Yeah.
at least I know it's Tuesday. So let's do some shallow dives before we do our deep dive.
Yep. Let's do it.
First of all, we have these mics that we're trying to sort out. At least I am all the time. Um, the great mic debate argument.
Right.
Yes.
Regarding the debate,
Whether it's
the
on
presidential
or
debate.
off, the same rules apply for Kamala as they did for Joe, and why Trump team is fighting this, wanting to shut off the mics. So clearly what's happening is they are not confident that they can control the message coming out of their candidate, nor have they been able to since, Kamala became the nominee.
Right. Right. And let's, because we're talking about the debates, as we all know, the first presidential debate of this cycle was, in June, which was an anomaly, quite frankly. Used to be, and jump in here, Jess, used to be that the debates, once the nominees were chosen, the debates were scheduled and ran by a group called the Presidential Commission on, or yeah, no, the Commission on Presidential Debates.
Yeah,
And that sounds about just as dry as you'd think it is. And the whole
right.
point is to make sure it's nonpartisan. It's just, these are the folks that just put the debates on. Okay. So for decades, forever, this was how this was done. So it would usually be 3 debates after the nominees were chosen officially, and then there would be one presidential debate or vice presidential debate.
Right.
So, but Trump, through that, he decided a long time ago that he wasn't willing to do that. And when you don't have the principals participate, then it just kind of whatever, it goes away. I mean, so go
Well,
back.
arguably that we would not be in this situation had Biden not wanted to do an early debate. And
Yeah.
probably they wanted the mic off as well for other reasons, right?
Sure.
But so we're now fast forward where the rules from the Biden campaign, the Trump folks want it to apply. We'll see what happens, right? I don't know who will give in
Right.
this situation. I also think that there are, you always have to pick your battles, and maybe this is a small battle, smallish battle, where he's doing what he's going to do, and there's enough of it happening where, we
Right.
don't have to wait for debate night to have him say
That's
the things
right.
that he's going to say.
Absolutely. And I personally think he was trying to get out of the debate.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
And then he had so much pushback from his own people, like, of course you're going to debate her. He was trying to set it up as it's unfair and it's not going to be fair. So why do I even bother? But
Yeah.
I think that, for his own people, they were like, get in there and debate her. I think Trump is, and if I had to guess, I guess his people are probably would like it if he didn't debate. He's such a wild card. He can stray off message so easily. So right now, and I'm going to speak broadly, I think the Harris-Walz campaign is controlling the narrative. And this was a complete flip from Biden-Harris. And so it just goes to show what the top of the ticket can, a change in the top of the ticket, which is what we all kind of anticipated / predicted, is how transformative that can be.
Well, I've negotiated debates before, and it is like it's just awful. Here you are having real conversations with the campaigns of your opponent, and you're not getting along, and you want to anyway. It's just like sort of the worst thing because you both want certain things, and it's hard to give the give. And so now what we see is the narratives being controlled. Feels like they're having an issue with it. But the second shallow dive I wanted to do, a couple, like one is, I don't think in our podcast we gave Michelle Obama enough credit for what she did. Even my mom was like, she was better than Barack, and my mom's like a very good gauge for me on some of the stuff, who stayed up to watch all the coverage. Michelle Obama is just, man.
Right. She is
looks
so
amazing.
good.
She also gave us permission, I would say, to go low, which I love, right? She said when they go low, we go high. But now she's like, we can go low now. And we don't have to go so far low, but Mama Michelle said we can. So
That's
we
right.
can.
And my favorite part about her speech, and I agree with you, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And I think she's a really good public speaker. Obviously, we know he is, but I think she's just as good, if not better, in certain situations. But I also, my favorite part about her speech was the part where, and you're going to, when I say this, Jess, you're going to be like, of course, is when she told the far left not to get bogged down in crazy details. And, and not to be like, well, if this candidate, Harris and Walz, if they don't line up with every, policy position that I have or want, then I'm not voting for them. And I like that because she's about the only person that can do that and get away with it. Maybe Bernie can do it too. But
I think Bernie's been probably doing that for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly for Joe Biden. And in full disclosure, right, we worked for Bernie. So when you hear Kristian say the far left and all this sort of stuff, like we
did work for them, yeah.
Yes.
And we
sometimes
in Iowa,
we worked for every different spectrum of candidates. You don't always have to agree with the person that you work for, right?
Right.
But you do have to understand their messaging and how to win, right?
That's right. And that's exactly it. And so I was happy to hear her say that. Like I said, she's one of the few people that can get away with it. And so, and you know how I am about that. I'm like, we got to win. You have to appeal to the middle in order to do that, far left. And I actually think that, Kamala has already proven her liberal cred in other ways. So, anyway, and Tim Walz obviously has quite a bit of progressive cred. So anyway, I was glad she said that, and I really liked her speech, and I thought everybody did a great job. Frankly, like I said before, I wouldn't change a whole lot about that convention.
So before we get to you, any other shallow dives that you want to bring up this week?
Um, I was, let's talk about a little bit. We don't need to get too into this. We talked about it last time. Is this idea that she needs to sit down for a big interview with the national press, answer the tough questions, as they say. And I go back to, I don't think she needs to do that at all. I think she will. And I think they're prepping her for it. If she has a debate, if this debate, which is, I think, next week or the week after soon, okay, with Trump, I would rather her prep for that. Although one could argue that having the sit down would be prep for that. But as you know, and as a communications professional, sometimes these, long interview type of things can derail you because you give too much detail, or, or you kind of get trapped into an answer.
Can I say this? There's a Seth Herndon who does the New York Times podcast, who I love that podcast. She did an interview with him a while ago. It was very fascinating. And what she did in that interview was argue the premise of mostly all of his questions, which I don't think would play well. And I'm not sure that they would, do that, but it's worth listening to. I think I think what it seemed like she was just frustrated by, between gotcha questions and wrong premise questions and that sort of stuff, which we understand. But as, a communications person, the answers, you don't have to answer the question as it's posed. You can answer the question the way you want to answer it. Arguing about the question creates a different dynamic between you and the interviewee. Maybe they'll find somebody that they know and have trusted for a long time. I don't know what they're going to do, but I agree with you. I mean, I think, we have a few, short amount of time. Do what's important.
Do what's important.
And
That's
don't
right.
play to the Washington press, even though a lot of people probably around her live in some sort of a bubble that there's a lot of pressure for that,
Yes.
because look, they're doing their job. So that's good.
Absolutely.
So maybe this is a good segue into talking about comms, since that's your expertise.
Yes.
When we talk about this a lot, I think Kristian places a lot of importance on our next generation, which is great. And as a professor, but she gets, the reason why we're doing this specifically is she gets asked the question a lot, like, how do you get into this work? And I would say, from my own personal viewpoint, I had no idea as a poli-sci major at Central College in Pella, Iowa, how to get into this work either. But you found your way into it. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And maybe you can talk about the experiences over the last years, that what you've learned and what you think is important for encouraging people to feel like this piece of democracy and the role that you play is important.
And it's so true, because I get asked a lot how I got into the business, and it makes me feel so good when bright, capable, younger people come to me and say that. Either they say they want to, work in politics like I do, or they want to run for office. And I'm thinking, with, the current political situation and how polarized we are, I am so gratified to hear that good people still want to go into politics, but I get asked a lot, and I got to say that my story is a little meandering, but I think everybody's is a little bit, and we'll talk about how I made my way to Iowa. First time I'd ever been there, and I met Jess, a bunch of people. I met a bunch of people, but who were just wonderful, and My time in Iowa was just fantastic. I learned so much, but then Jess and I, our friendship has kind of endured rather, and we have this business and everything like that. But so I grew up in Northwest Florida, which is, not Miami. And I can't tell you how many people.
You should be more specific about where.
Yes.
I mean, for our 17 listeners, you should be more specific.
Well, I grew up in the panhandle of Florida. So to give you some context, the Alabama border is about a 40-mile drive from my hometown. So that gives you an idea of where.
I should look from Pace to Miami, how far that is. No offense to those who grew up in Miami, of course.
Yes.
But just a different part of the state.
And, so often, people will say, where are you from? I'll say, Florida. And they'll say, oh, I love Miami. And I'll say, oh, yeah, it's a nice place. Well, I thought you're from Florida. Well, I'm not from Miami. And they just don't understand that it's not the same thing. I'm sure New York City is the same way. People just think of one city as being. So anyway, but I grew up in a rural area. And like I said, southern, culturally very southern, but on the water, beautiful place. Just a gorgeous place. And full disclosure, Matt Gaetz is my hometown's Congress person. That also tells you probably everything you need to know. So when I was in college, I knew I wanted to go into some sort of public service. I didn't think I wanted to.
Where'd you go to college? I think that's an important factor in this.
I went to college in state. I went to Florida State University in Tallahassee, which is about a 3-hour drive from my hometown.
And the capital.
And the capital of the state. And I knew I wanted to do something in public service, not necessarily run for office, but, work in government. And so I did a couple internships there in Tallahassee because that was so accessible given that, state capitol's there, state legislature. And then after I graduated, I moved out west to attend graduate school. Again, assuming that I needed a graduate degree to kind of further my education so I could go off and in my mind at the time, I thought I'd be like a county executive or something. And I know that is or can be an elected position, but in some places it's not. But that was kind of what I was thinking. So I move out west and I start graduate school. I was living in California in the San Joaquin Valley. And I started working as an internship. I was in graduate school and I started working for Congressman Gary Condit. Do you remember him, Jess?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I do. Mm-hmm. I was working on Capitol Hill, actually.
When all that went down?
I'm pretty sure. That was like 90... Wait. No.
2000, 2001?
Yeah.
Something like that. And we don't have to get into it here. If you'd like, go ahead and Google it. Right. Because it's a long story.
It turned out it's not funny at all.
No.
It's not a funny story at all.
No. But
it's also an interesting dynamic to start out one of your first jobs in Congress in the district.
Right. I was in the district, A, and B, when I worked for Gary, it was almost 10 years after when all of that happened with him and the big scandal that I had stopped working for him. It had been 8 years, since I'd worked for him. So there was that, but I got to tell you, I really liked the work and I learned so much. And so
I almost didn't know it was a job. Like my first job out of college, when I did it was for a member's reelect, and then I worked for his district office as well. I guess we could put together the timeline, but
right.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed it and I learned so much, and I was in California, and then I decided to move up to the Pacific Northwest because I was getting ready to head back east, where obviously I'm from, and somebody mentioned to me, kind of in passing, that I should go up to the Pacific Northwest and check it out before I went back east, and so I did. And while I was there, I did a couple of different jobs, but I did work for the Washington Democratic Party and that kind of thing. I was there during the '96 election and the coordinated efforts and all that. I mean, obviously, Washington is more of a Democratic state, so there wasn't this huge, big presence or effort. And then I moved back east after that. I moved to DC and I started working on campaigns. And I went to South Carolina and I did a campaign there. And how did that happen? Well, this is an interesting story because, keep in mind, this is pre-internet.
Right. Probably didn't have a cell phone. Maybe a pager.
Right. Or Black. I remember the first time I ever saw a BlackBerry.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just like, voodoo magic. It was so wild. Like you can actually check your email and you don't have to be at your computer,
Yeah.
So, but I faxed my resume to the DSCC and I got a call. Steve, and it was Steve Hildebrand. I know you've heard this story, Jeff.
That's great. Yeah.
Right. And he said, "Hey, I got a campaign for you. They need you down there ASAP." Oh, and I said, "Okay, where?" It's in South Carolina. The next thing you know, I'm on the phone with the campaign manager. Then the next thing you know, I'm driving down there. So that was, this is kind of what we did. I mean, you would just, I think, you have to be available and ready to move and ready to,
Be
you know what I
paid
mean?
nothing,
You have to,
probably. Yeah.
and work all the
At the
time.
time.
And work all the time. Again, I don't know if that still applies, but back
I
then
don't think so. That's changed a little bit. We should get some new,
Right.
some guests on in the future where, their campaigns have unionized. They have specific hours. They have, health care. They have, which is great. And they
Right.
have protections from abuse in other ways. But yeah,
Yes.
kind of didn't exist when we were
No.
in that situation.
And I mentioned the South Carolina thing because I really didn't have a huge background in, up to that point, I did not have a huge background in press or press relations. But I did do press on that campaign. And so
You want to tell who you worked for? I mean,
I worked for Fritz Hollings. If you guys remember him, I mean, he was an old, one of the stately, Dems, Sam Nunn, those guys, of that ilk. This is going back a ways. But it was his last campaign, and it was his first. This was the other thing. It was his first time running like a real campaign. And he was already in his late 70s, and it was hard, he was a little uncomfortable with that whole thing, but we did it and we won. And this was also, if I'm, since we're being honest here, that year was I did not have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky.
Oh,
that was,
right.
And here we are in a conservative state running a Dem. So,
yeah.
right.
There's
So
a headwind is what you're saying.
Right, there's a
Yeah.
headwind. And so I did that, and I got such great experience. And then when I came back to DC after the election, I was able to just step right in, and you can identify with this, Jess, to a communications director spot on the Hill working for a U.S. senator. And so, in other words, I think when you do campaign work, it kind of puts you on the fast track. And
True.
well,
You don't get training. That is your training.
That's my training, yeah. And so, and so, if you do those things, you take these risks, if you will, then you win. You get rewarded. So,
well, Not a
sometimes.
meritocracy, but
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right. So
Agree. I think if you work, I think, yes, you can rise the ranks. I agree with that.
I went to the Hill, and I actually think, I still believe that all campaign operatives should work on the Hill,
Yep.
at least a little bit. I still
Yep.
believe that. It wasn't really my bag.
Same. Yep.
And we can talk a little bit about why we think that, or why we feel that way. But
Yeah.
there's so many things that come into play there, especially, and I never worked on the House side. I only worked on the Senate side. So, but it just, if it really comes down to, who the member is and what committee assignments they have and their seniority and all that. If you wish to break through, and again, it's not about, you should, what you
Now
should
it's
care.
different, I would say. Then that was correct. Now it's like how many times you're on MSNBC or Fox News or some of
Right.
that sort of social media, but yes, or what your positions you take. But I agree with you on that. Yeah, and I think that's right. If working on Capitol Hill gives you a perspective about what you're trying to do on campaigns,
Right.
makes it different, especially if you worked for somebody who's running for Congress or running for Senate and you've worked in those spaces, it gives you a broader perspective on how it works.
I agree. And so I worked for Patty Murray of Washington State, which incidentally, I'd been living there, and I came back to DC and started working for her. And after that, I kind of took a little bit of a detour. I was trying from my perspective, to get into more of a long-term job and PR. And I was kind of recruited to work for, and again, this is very much Washington focused, but this media company that was, a Washington media company, and they published things like Congress Daily and National Journal and the Hotline, which back then these were all big deal. And so I started working for them, and I liked it, except I met my husband during that time, and I didn't think that it was a good idea that he and I work together. So I went back to politics, and I got a job working for John Edwards for his PAC. Senator John Edwards from North Carolina, who's running for president, or he was rumored to be setting up a run for president. So this is 2002, right? So I was hired by his PAC to go out to Iowa and kind of lay the groundwork for him running. He was kind of an unknown. He had a bit of a national profile, but he was kind of an unknown. He was this trial attorney that was able to raise a bunch of money. And so in Iowa at the time, there were two big statewide races. And so I went out and Jess, you can speak better to this than me because you were the person that kind of implemented. So the PAC agreed to pay my salary. And so I went out and just started learning Iowa. And that's how I met Jessica Vandenberg. And
you had just got married, right? I
Yes.
mean, like literally, like when you go back to like, I went to South Carolina because I was really willing to get up and go. I worked for this PAC, and they said, "Hey, go out to Iowa," and you're like, "Well, I just got married, like I don't know, a month ago, 2 months ago, but see you later," and you whatever, and then I've never been married, so I haven't had to leave, my significant other. There's probably reasons why being a campaign is attributed to the way my life is, but nevertheless, that's an interesting experience where you're like, okay, I'm looking for something more permanent.
Yep. And
Left
then
it
I go right
permanent,
back.
and then you got right back in it.
I got right back into it. And so my husband is a political journalist, so he totally got it. Well, you're going to Iowa, of course you got it. I mean, Iowa, yes. And so, Iowa at the time, and unfortunately for us or me, the Dems kind of dumped Iowa as an early state. But they were the first in the nation, and they were caucus state, so it's a little different. And we should, talk more about caucuses, because I actually do get a lot of questions about that too, about the difference between a caucus and a primary, and it's very different. And especially in Iowa, it's like you got to go. I think it's in early February now, at least when the Republicans do it, but it's cold, and the weather could be doing just about anything, but people show up. It's an amazing thing to behold.
Yeah, to have a PhD in mathematical equation to run a precinct.
Yes.
But yeah, it's
especially the way the Dems do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went out to Iowa, and I did Iowa, and I was working for John Edwards at the time. And as these things go, I ended up leaving the Edwards campaign and then joining the Bob Graham campaign, leading up to the 2004 election cycle. And Senator Bob Graham, was the former governor of Florida when I was growing up, Florida senator, U.S. senator, and so I was working for him, and and Jess actually ran Iowa for Bob Graham, which was.
I think you recruited me.
I did recruit you, yeah, and that was kind of the beginning of a long history of us. Like, oh, you need a campaign manager? Let me talk to Jess, And so we ended up working together again, where Jess was the campaign manager and I was the communications person on a statewide race here in Virginia. This was in 2006. So, and we won, and it was huge. We had a first-time candidate. We were running against an entrenched incumbent, George Allen, and we
Jim Webb.
His name was Jim Webb. When Jim won, it flipped the control of the Senate to the Dems. Mm-hmm. So it was a huge, huge thing, and nobody expected us to win, and we did, and that's when I think back to that campaign, there's still lessons from that campaign that still apply today. I mean, yes, things change. Yes, the way we communicate updates, but there's still some, what do you call it? Like the basics are still in place. Mm-hmm. And, we appealed a lot. So the other thing about our guy at the time, he had been a registered Republican, all his life. And he got very frustrated with the Republicans over the Iraq War. And so he decided to run as a Dem. And he had a ton of credibility,
Well, I think his populist message, there was a few people who have had a populist message. Sherrod Brown on the D side, right? Bernie. And now Trump has sort of taken this thing over and ran with it. And I think one of the reasons why they're appealing to, some of these folks that you seem to think seem to call moderate. I don't want to say seem to think. I don't disagree with you, but I think in all the information that I've seen, this populist message really is working with them. And and Jim really embraced that culturally, and
right.
And it was an interesting. It was an interesting race for sure.
And
so that was 2006. Yeah,
that was 2006, and then then we started our business, and we've been together working on our business ever since, and we are as we're consultants that do direct mail, but we're also strategists because a lot of what we do is targeting, making sure the right people get the right message. And we've been doing that ever since. And so, you know, I guess the moral of the story is, how do you get in this business? Well, you make yourself available and then you go where you're needed and you show up and you do what's asked of you, and make yourself kind of indispensable. I mean, that might be oversimplifying it a bit, but you know what I'm saying?
Right. It's sort of like the old hard work is sort of best evidence of how to run, think through it. But also like, I think it's not always what you know, it's who you know and who will give you a break and who will give you a shot. And there's a lot of that out there, too. But yeah, so is that your biggest piece of advice if when your students come to you, is that, do what's needed of you, work really hard and,
Well, and we can get a little bit more specific, but I also tell people, you know, try not to get bogged down in like titles or job descriptions and about what you will and won't do. I mean, you can do that. You can do that, but it's kind of what my best advice is that do what you're asked. And I'll give you a piece of advice that my father gave me years and years ago when after I'd graduated from college, and he was just giving me some work advice, like general work advice. And one of those was, whatever you're asked to do it with your smile on your face and give it your all. And he used this example, which I think is a good one. He said, if they ask you to run around the office, like make laps around the office, he said, you do that and you do it with a smile on your face because you never know, one day somebody important's going to come in and like, we need somebody to run around the office. And then they'll say, well, Kristian's been doing it and she's been doing a great job. So now all of a sudden, you have that FaceTime with the principal, all those things. And another little story I relayed to people who ask is when I was going back to South Carolina after we had won, and I was having this basically like an exit interview with the campaign manager who during the campaign was a very busy guy. I mean, I had a fair amount of interaction with him, but he was busy. It's not like we had these heart to hearts, during the campaign. And so he told me, he said, I want to thank you. It was just he and I, because he was like, okay, what can I do to help you? And I said, and we started having that conversation. He said, but first I want to thank you. He said, you've been great. He goes, you do exactly what we ask. You always have a smile on your face. You never complain. You're here every day. And he said, I want to thank you for that. And I think just showing up, right, on time and not complaining, I think it helped a lot. What do you think?
No, I like that.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end, actually. Like, I think it's good advice. And I think, there's this idea that you have to change the world right out of the box. And really, what you'll see is if you want to be in social justice work, political work, or whatever, that it's a series of, different movements throughout your career where it will change something, but it doesn't have to be the big thing, which we all wanted to do, as we graduated or we're looking back at this time. And I think your career shows that, you've been done a lot of different things, made a lot of big differences in people's lives. And I think it's not hard to remember that, going back to hard work is really important, and learning from other people, not knowing everything as you step out the gate. I'm learning things right now and the work that I'm doing, which makes it more exciting. And in politics, if you have the wherewithal, you can create a lot of opportunities for yourself because there's always work to be done.
Oh, amen. And I agree with you. It's like I learned, I mean, that's the other thing. Don't think you've learned everything there is to learn. I mean, especially in this biz. And then, you know, you can be successful too. So, but next time we'll talk about Jess's journey because I think it's important for folks who actually want to get into this business. And it's an interesting biz, that's for sure.
That's right. Thank you, all 23 people who have listened today. We love doing this. It's fun. There's no difference between our business calls and having these conversations, but we're glad. And thanks for the people who reached out and said positive things. We're always looking for feedback. We'll get back to you and hopefully get some more guests on here.
That's right. And let me just share with you the email. If you have any questions, comments, please send them to us at thediveinpod@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and YouTube for updates. And we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.